The howling winter wind cut through the empty streets of Red Bluff, California, like a sharpened knife through butter, bringing with it flurries of snow that defied the normally mild Northern California climate. Lillian Davis had never known such cold, not in all her 22 years. The freak blizzard of 1878 had taken everyone by surprise, turning the bustling frontier town into a frozen wasteland overnight. Lillian pushed forward against the relentless wind, her thin woolen coat providing little protection. She had been a fool to venture out, but her father's medicine couldn't wait. The influenza that ravaged his body would only worsen without Dr. Miller's tonic. Now, clutching the small glass bottle in her numbing fingers, she struggled to find her way back to their modest home at the edge of town. The world had become a blur of white. Landmarks disappeared under the thickening blanket of snow, and Lillian felt panic rising in her chest. Her hands, bare and exposed to the elements, had turned an alarming shade of blue. She could barely feel them anymore as they clutched the medicine bottle, her father's lifeline. "Miss, over here." A deep voice called out through the swirling snow. Lillian turned toward the sound, squinting against the icy particles that stung her face. A tall figure emerged from the whiteness, leading a sturdy buckskin horse by the reins. The man wore a heavy sheepskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the weather. "You'll freeze to death out here," he said, closing the distance between them with long strides. "Where are you headed?" "Pine Street," Lillian stammered through chattering teeth. The small H-house past the blacksmith's. The man nodded, his face partially hidden by a woolen scarf. Only his eyes were visible, striking blue eyes that reminded Lillian of summer skies, a stark contrast to the winter storm surrounding them. "I know the place. Come on, I'll get you home." Without warning, he reached for her hands, and Lillian noticed her fingers were trembling violently, the medicine bottle threatening to slip from her grasp. Her hands were shaking from the cold. The cowboy wrapped them in his own, his touch firm but gentle, enveloping her frozen fingers in blessed warmth. "The name's Ethan Calloway," he said, rubbing her hands between his gloved ones. "You're the Davis girl, aren't you? Your pa's been taken ill." Lillian nodded, surprised that this stranger knew of her family. "Lillian Davis. How did you small town?" Ethan replied with a shrug. "News travels fast, especially bad news." He carefully took the medicine bottle from her hands and tucked it safely into his coat pocket. "Let's get you out of this cold before you end up needing the doctor yourself." He lifted her effortlessly onto his horse, then swung up behind her. Lillian felt the solid warmth of his chest against her back as he reached around her to take the reins. For the first time since the storm began, she felt safe. "Hold tight now," Ethan instructed, urging the horse forward through the deepening snow. As they navigated the treacherous streets of Red Bluff, Lillian found herself wondering about the mysterious cowboy who had appeared just when she needed him most. The town was home to many cowboys and ranch hands who worked the surrounding cattle spreads, but she couldn't recall seeing Ethan Calloway before. She would have remembered those eyes. The journey to Pine Street took less time than Lillian expected. When they arrived at the modest clapboard house she shared with her father, Ethan dismounted first, then helped her down with strong, steady hands. "Thank you," Lillian said, looking up at him through snow-dusted lashes. "You may have saved my life out there." Ethan reached into his pocket and retrieved the medicine bottle. "Don't mention it. Now let's get this to your pa." Inside the house, Henry Davis lay on a narrow bed near the fireplace, his normally robust frame weakened by illness. His eyes fluttered open as Lillian entered with the stranger in tow. "I was worried sick," Henry managed between ragged coughs, "when the storm worsened." "I'm fine, Pa. Mr. Calloway helped me home. Lillian busied herself preparing the medicine according to Dr. Miller's instructions. Ethan stood awkwardly by the door, removing his hat to reveal thick brown hair. Your daughter's a brave one, Mr. Davis. Not many would venture out in weather like this. Henry studied the young cowboy with interest. Calloway, you say? You work for one of the ranches around here. The Cross Creek outfit, sir. Just started last month. Came up from Texas looking for work. After administering her father's medicine, Lillian stoked the fire and put on a pot of coffee. The least she could do was offer her rescuer something warm before he ventured back out into the storm. As she moved about the small kitchen, she was acutely aware of Ethan's eyes following her. The coffee won't be but a minute, she said, suddenly self-conscious about the simplicity of their home. Please sit. Ethan removed his heavy coat and took a seat at the rough-hewn table. Nice place you have here. It's modest, but it's home, Lillian replied, pouring the steaming coffee into a chipped mug. We came west after my mother passed. Pa thought a fresh start would do us good. And has it? Ethan asked, accepting the coffee with a nod of thanks. Lillian glanced at her father, who had drifted back to sleep. It's been challenging. Pa works at the lumber mill when there's work to be had. I take in sewing and washing. We get by. Something flickered across Ethan's face, admiration, perhaps. That's all any of us can do, isn't it? Just get by and hope for something better. They fell into easy conversation as the storm raged outside. Ethan told her about growing up on a small ranch in the Texas Hill Country, about losing his parents to a fever when he was 17, and about drifting from place to place before finding work in California. Lillian shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, of her mother's death, and of the difficult journey west with her grieving father. Hours passed, and the blizzard showed no sign of abating. Henry's condition had stabilized, his breathing easier after taking the medicine, but he remained deeply asleep. You should stay, Lillian found herself saying as Ethan glanced out the frosted window. At least until the storm passes. Your horse is sheltered in our lean-to, and we have a small pallet you can use near the fire. Ethan hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and practicality. I wouldn't want to impose or cause any gossip. With my father here as chaperone, Lillian smiled. Besides, who would know? The whole town is shuttered against this storm. Eventually, Ethan agreed. As night fell, Lillian prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, which they ate in companionable silence. Afterward, she made up a pallet for him near the fireplace, while she took her usual place in the small alcove off the main room. Sleep came fitfully for Lillian that night. She found herself thinking about the cowboy sleeping just beyond the thin curtain that separated her alcove from the main room. There was something about Ethan Calloway that intrigued her, a quiet strength, a gentle manner that belied his rugged appearance. And those eyes. Those impossibly blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. Morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through the windows. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white. Lillian rose early and found Ethan already awake, stoking the fire. Good morning, he said, straightening up as she entered. How's your father? Lillian checked on Henry, placing a hand on his forehead. The fever's broken. He's sleeping peacefully. That's good news. Ethan donned his coat. I should be heading back to the ranch. Mr. Walsh doesn't take kindly to hands who don't show up for work, blizzard or no. A strange disappointment settled in Lillian's chest. Of course. Thank you again for your help. At the door, Ethan paused, his hat in his hands. Miss Davis, Lillian, I was wondering if I might call on you sometime. Properly, I mean. Lillian felt a blush creep up her cheeks. I would like that very much, Mr. Calloway. Ethan, he corrected with a smile that transformed his serious face. After all, we've shared a roof for a night. I think we can dispense with formalities." "Ethan," she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her lips. After he left, Lillian stood at the window watching until his figure disappeared into the snow-covered streets. She couldn't explain the fluttering sensation in her stomach, but she knew with certainty that she wanted to see Ethan Calloway again. True to his word, Ethan returned to call on Lillian the following Sunday. He arrived at midday, dressed in his best clothes, clean denims, a pressed shirt, and a jacket that had seen better days but had clearly been brushed meticulously. In his hands, he held a small bouquet of winter greenery adorned with red berries. Henry Davis, now recovering from his bout with influenza, answered the door with suspicious eyes that softened somewhat at the young man's formal demeanor. "Mr. Davis, sir," Ethan said, removing his hat. "I've come to call on Miss Lillian with your permission." Henry studied the cowboy for a long moment before stepping aside. "She's mentioned you helped her during the storm. I suppose I owe you my thanks for that." Lillian appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her heart quickening at the sight of Ethan standing awkwardly in their small sitting room. She had spent more time than usual on her appearance that morning, pinning her chestnut hair in a simple but flattering style, and wearing her best dress, a blue calico that brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes. "Ethan," she greeted him with a smile. "What a pleasant surprise." "I thought perhaps, if you're not otherwise occupied, you might accompany me for a walk through town," Ethan suggested, offering her the modest bouquet. "The roads have been cleared and the sun is shining." Henry cleared his throat pointedly. "Lillian has chores to attend to, Mr. Calloway." "Pa," Lillian protested gently, "the washing is done and the bread is cooling. Surely I can spare an hour for a walk." After some negotiation, Henry relented, though not without establishing clear boundaries. "Have her back before supper, Calloway. And mind you stay on the main streets where folks can see you." Ethan nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir. You have my word." As they stepped out into the crisp winter air, Lillian felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in years. Since her mother's death, she had shouldered the responsibilities of keeping house for her father, with little time for social activities. The simple act of walking beside Ethan through the streets of Red Bluff felt like a luxury. "Your father doesn't seem to approve of me," Ethan observed as they made their way toward the town center. Lillian sighed. "He's protective. It's been just the two of us for so long, he worries." "As he should," Ethan replied. "You're precious to him." The sincerity in his voice warmed Lillian more than her woolen shawl. They walked past the general store, the blacksmith shop, and the newly constructed schoolhouse, exchanging stories and observations. Ethan told her about his work at the Cross Creek Ranch, about the demanding but fair Mr. Walsh, and about his dream of someday having land of his own. "It's all I've ever wanted," he confessed as they paused by the town square. "A piece of earth that belongs to me, where I can build something lasting." "That's a worthy dream," Lillian said. "My father had similar aspirations when we came west, but circumstances, well, life doesn't always unfold as planned." Ethan's eyes held a gentle understanding. "What about you, Lillian? What dreams do you harbor?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked about her dreams in so long that she'd almost forgotten she had any. "I suppose I've always wanted a home filled with laughter and love. Children, perhaps. And books I love to read, though there's precious little time for it these days." "You deserve all of that and more," Ethan said quietly. Their walk ended too soon for Lillian's liking, but Ethan was careful to return her home at the promised time. At the door, he hesitated before speaking. "I'm heading into Sacramento next weekend to deliver some horses for Mr. Walsh. I'll be gone for about 10 days. He shifted his weight, a gesture Lillian was beginning to recognize as nervousness. But when I return, I'd like to call on you again if that's acceptable. I'd like that very much, Lillian replied, her heart light with anticipation. After Ethan left, Henry watched his daughter moving about the kitchen with a new spring in her step. That Calloway boy seems to have made quite an impression on you. Lillian tried to keep her expression neutral. He's kind and respectful, Pa, a hard worker from what he says. Henry folded his newspaper. Cowboys are drifters by nature, Lil. They follow the work, never staying in one place too long. That's no life for a woman. He has dreams of his own land someday, Lillian defended, then immediately regretted revealing how much she already cared about Ethan's aspirations. Henry's eyes softened. Just be careful with your heart, daughter. That's all I ask. The days crawled by as Lillian waited for Ethan's return. She threw herself into her work, taking on extra sewing commissions and keeping the house spotless. Each day, she found herself watching the road from the window, hoping for a glimpse of a familiar figure on horseback. Almost 2 weeks after his departure, Ethan returned to Red Bluff. He came directly to Lillian's house, still dusty from the trail, his face weary but brightening at the sight of her. I apologize for my appearance, he said, remaining on the porch rather than entering. I wanted to see you as soon as I got back, but I should have cleaned up first. Lillian shook her head, unable to hide her delight at seeing him. Nonsense, you look wonderful, she wanted to say, but settled for, like you've had a long journey. It was, Ethan agreed, but I brought something for you. From his saddlebag, he produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. It's not much, but when I saw it in Sacramento, I thought of you. Inside the package, Lillian found a book, a well-preserved copy of Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. She ran her fingers over the embossed cover, touched beyond words by the thoughtful gift. You mentioned loving books, Ethan explained. The shopkeeper said this one is popular with ladies. It's perfect, Lillian whispered, fighting back unexpected tears. Truly, it's the most thoughtful gift I've ever received. From that day forward, Ethan became a regular visitor at the Davis home. He would come by whenever he could get away from his duties at the ranch, sometimes just for a brief visit, other times staying for supper when Henry invited him. Gradually, even Henry began to warm to the young cowboy, impressed by his work ethic and respectful manner. As winter gave way to spring, Lillian and Ethan's feelings for each other deepened. They found moments to be alone, chaperoned walks through town, picnics by the Sacramento River when the weather permitted, and quiet conversations on the Davis porch as the sun set. One mild April evening, as they sat on the porch swing watching fireflies begin their nightly dance, Ethan took Lillian's hand in his. I've been saving every penny I can, he said, his voice low and intense. Mr. Walsh says there's a small parcel of land coming available near the north pasture. It's not much, just 40 acres with a creek running through it, but it's good grazing land with enough flat ground for a modest house and garden. Lillian's heart quickened. Ethan, that sounds wonderful. I'm still far short of what I need, he admitted. But I've been taking on extra work breaking horses for neighboring ranches, helping with cattle drives when I can. Another year, maybe 2, and I could make an offer. You'll do it, Lillian said with conviction. I believe in you. Ethan's eyes searched hers. Lillian, I need to know. If I were to have that land, that home I dream of building, would you consider sharing it with me? Not now, but someday, when I can offer you the life you deserve. It wasn't a formal proposal, but rather a promise, a vision of a shared future that made Lillian's heart soar. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I would consider that very carefully indeed. The gentle kiss they shared, their first, was brief but filled with promise. Neither noticed Henry watching from the window, his expression a complex mixture of concern and resignation. The following day, Henry called Ethan into his workshop behind the house. Lillian watched nervously as the two men disappeared inside, wondering what her father intended to say to the young cowboy who had captured her heart. Inside the workshop, surrounded by the tools of his occasional carpentry work, Henry got straight to the point. "I see the way you look at my daughter, Calloway." Ethan stood tall, meeting the older man's gaze directly. "Yes, sir, I care deeply for Lillian." "And what are your intentions?" Henry demanded. "She's not some dalliance to pass the time between cattle drives." "No, sir, she's not," Ethan agreed firmly. "I intend to marry her if she'll have me and if you'll give your blessing, but I want to provide for her properly first. I'm saving for land of my own." Henry studied the young man before him. Despite his initial reservations, he had come to respect Ethan's character over the past months. "And how long will that take? A year? 5 years? Lillian's not getting any younger." "I hope to have enough for a down payment within a year," Ethan replied. "I've been putting aside every spare cent." Henry was quiet for a long moment, then moved to a trunk in the corner of the workshop. He unlocked it and withdrew a small leather pouch. "I had dreams once too, Calloway, dreams of land and a prosperous farm. This was to be the down payment." He handed the pouch to Ethan, who looked inside to find several gold coins. "Sir, I can't accept this." "You're not accepting anything yet," Henry said gruffly. "Consider it an investment in my daughter's future happiness. If you're serious about providing for Lillian, this might help you do it sooner rather than later." "I'll pay back every cent," Ethan promised. Henry waved away the promise. "Just make her happy, boy. That's repayment enough." When they emerged from the workshop, Lillian was waiting anxiously on the back steps. The sight of both men smiling eased her concerns immediately. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Ethan glanced at Henry, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Everything's fine," Ethan assured her. "Your father and I were just discussing the future." The arrival of summer brought changes to Red Bluff. The town was growing, with new businesses opening along the main street and more settlers arriving each month. Ethan continued to work at the Cross Creek Ranch, but now with a renewed purpose. The additional funds from Henry had accelerated his timeline considerably. In late July, Ethan rode out to inspect the 40-acre parcel he had his eye on. The land was everything he'd hoped for: gently rolling hills perfect for grazing, a clear creek providing year-round water, and a flat area ideal for building. With Henry's contribution and his own savings, he had nearly enough for the down payment. On his return to town, Ethan stopped first at the Davis home, finding Lillian hanging laundry in the yard. The sight of her cheeks flushed from work, hair escaping its pins in the summer breeze, filled him with a certainty he'd never known before. "The land is perfect, Lil," he said, helping her with a heavy bed sheet. "You should see it. The creek runs right where we could put a house, and there are wildflowers everywhere. Come Sunday, I want to take you there." Lillian smiled at his enthusiasm. "I'd love that." That Sunday, with Henry's reluctant permission, Ethan took Lillian to see the land that might become their home. They rode double on his horse, Lillian's arms wrapped comfortably around Ethan's waist, her cheek resting against his back. The journey took nearly an hour, but when they crested the final hill and the property spread out before them, Lillian gasped in delight. "Oh, Ethan, it's beautiful." He helped her down from the horse, and they walked the boundaries of the property together, Ethan pointing out where he envisioned fences, corrals, and eventually their home. Near the creek, they spread a blanket and enjoyed the picnic lunch Lillian had prepared. "I can see it all so clearly," Ethan said, leaning back on his elbows and gazing across the landscape. A small herd to start, then building up year by year. A vegetable garden for you, maybe some fruit trees eventually. Lillian watched him, her heart full. It sounds like heaven. Ethan sat up suddenly, reaching for her hand. Lillian, I didn't bring you out here just to show you the land. From his pocket, he produced a small box, simple and unadorned, but what it represented was anything but simple. I love you, Lillian Davis. I've loved you since that day in the blizzard when you looked up at me with snow on your lashes and determination in your eyes. He opened the box to reveal a modest ring with a small pearl set in silver. I know this isn't much. It's perfect, Lillian interrupted, tears welling in her eyes. Will you marry me, Lil? Will you build this dream with me side by side? Lillian's answer was immediate and heartfelt. Yes, Ethan. Yes, with all my heart. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, sealing their promise with a tender kiss, Lillian felt as though her life was truly beginning. The cold winter day when Ethan had wrapped her shaking hands in his own had set them on this path, and now they would walk it together. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Red Bluff. Most reactions were positive. Ethan had earned a reputation as a reliable, hard-working cowboy, and Lillian was well respected for her industriousness and kind nature. However, not everyone welcomed the match. Judith Taylor, the daughter of the town's most prosperous merchant, had set her sights on Ethan months ago. When she learned of his engagement to that seamstress girl, as she called Lillian, her jealousy manifested as malicious gossip. I heard he's only marrying her because old Henry Davis is paying him to, Judith told anyone who would listen at the general store. That cowboy's been sweet-talking half the girls in the county, making the same promises to all of them. Word of the rumors eventually reached Lillian, brought reluctantly by her friend Martha, the schoolteacher. I don't believe a word of it, Martha assured her. Anyone with eyes can see how Ethan feels about you, but I thought you should know what's being said. Though Lillian tried to dismiss the gossip, a seed of doubt had been planted. Why would Ethan choose her, a simple seamstress with no dowry to speak of, when he could have courted someone like Judith Taylor, whose father could have helped him achieve his dreams much faster? When Ethan came by that evening, Lillian was unusually quiet, prompting his concern. What's troubling you, Lil? She hesitated, not wanting to give power to the rumors by repeating them. It's nothing. It's not nothing if it's put that shadow in your eyes, Ethan insisted gently. Talk to me. Finally, Lillian shared what she had heard, watching Ethan's expression darken with each word. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, he said when she finished. Judith Taylor has been making eyes at every unmarried man in town since she turned 16. She's just angry I never showed interest. But my father did give you money, Lillian pointed out quietly. For the land. Ethan took her hands in a gesture that now held even more meaning for them both. Your father offered to help because he wants your happiness, and because he believes in what we're trying to build together. I didn't ask for his help, Lil, and I certainly didn't agree to marry you in exchange for money. His indignation was so genuine, his eyes so clear and honest, that Lillian felt ashamed for doubting him even for a moment. I know that, truly I do. It's just, sometimes I wonder why you chose me. Ethan's expression softened. How could I not choose you? You're the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. From that first day when you were willing to risk your life to get medicine for your father, I knew you were someone special. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. I don't care what Judith Taylor or anyone else in this town says. You're the only one I want, the only one I've ever wanted since I came to Red Bluff. Their wedding was set for October, when the worst heat of summer had passed, but before winter's chill returned to Northern California. In the weeks leading up to the ceremony, Ethan finalized the purchase of the land, making the down payment and signing the necessary papers. It was official they would have a place of their own to begin their married life. The wedding itself was a simple affair, held in the small church in Red Bluff with most of the town in attendance. Lillian wore a dress she had made herself cream-colored muslin, with lace she had carefully salvaged from her mother's wedding gown. Martha stood as her witness, while Mr. Walsh, Ethan's employer, stood up for him. As they exchanged vows, Lillian thought back to that frigid winter day when fate had brought them together. How strange that the worst blizzard in Red Bluff's history had led to the happiest day of her life. After the ceremony, the town gathered in the church hall for a modest celebration. Even Judith Taylor attended, though she remained in a corner with a sour expression throughout the festivities. Her father, however, approached the newlyweds with genuine goodwill, presenting them with a fine set of dishes as a wedding gift. "Every new home needs proper dinnerware," Mr. Taylor said kindly, "especially when you'll be so far from town." As the celebration continued, Ethan pulled Lillian aside for a moment of privacy. "I have something for you," he said, presenting her with a small package. Inside, Lillian found a silver locket on a delicate chain. "Open it," Ethan urged. The locket contained a tiny, expertly cut silhouette of Ethan's profile. "So I'll always be close to your heart," he explained, "even when work takes me away from home." Tears of joy sprang to Lillian's eyes as Ethan fastened the locket around her neck. "I'll never take it off," she promised. That night, they stayed at the small hotel in Red Bluff, a luxury Ethan had insisted upon for their first night as husband and wife. The following morning, they would make the journey to their new property, where a temporary shelter awaited them while they built their permanent home. As Ethan carried Lillian across the threshold of the hotel room, both were nervous but filled with anticipation. The intimacy they shared that night was tender and sweet, a beginning to the physical expression of the love that had grown between them over the past months. Dawn found them curled together, Lillian's head resting on Ethan's chest, his arm protectively around her shoulders. Outside their window, Red Bluff was coming to life, wagons rattling down the main street, shopkeepers opening for business, the blacksmith's hammer already ringing against his anvil. "Mrs. Calloway," Ethan murmured against Lillian's hair. "How does it feel to have a new name?" Lillian smiled, tracing lazy patterns on his chest. "Wonderful, though I think I'll need some time to get used to it." "We have all the time in the world," Ethan assured her, placing a kiss on her forehead. After a simple breakfast, they loaded their modest possessions onto a borrowed wagon and set out for their land. Lillian had packed the essentials for starting their new home: linens, cookware, the dishes from Mr. Taylor, and a few treasured books, including the copy of Jane Eyre that Ethan had given her. The journey seemed shorter this time, perhaps because they were traveling toward a future together rather than just visiting a possibility. When they arrived, Ethan helped Lillian down from the wagon, then swept her into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Calloway," he said, carrying her across the threshold of the simple one-room cabin he had constructed over the past weeks. It was basic dirt floor, rough-hewn furniture, a stone fireplace, but to Lillian, it was perfect. "Our beginning," she whispered, looking around at what would be their home until they could build something more substantial. The first year on their land was challenging but rewarding. Ethan continued to work at the Cross Creek Ranch 3 days a week, using his earnings to gradually improve their property. On his days at home, he worked tirelessly building fences, constructing a proper barn, and beginning to assemble a small herd of cattle that would eventually provide their livelihood. Lillian transformed the cabin into a cozy home, creating curtains from fabric scraps, planting a vegetable garden that thrived in the fertile soil near the creek, and even starting a small flock of chickens that provided eggs and occasional meat. She still took in sewing when she could, contributing to their savings for the larger house they planned to build. Their life settled into a rhythm that suited them both, hard work balanced by quiet evenings together, reading by lamplight or simply talking about their dreams for the future. They faced setbacks, of course a late frost that damaged the garden, a valuable heifer lost to wolves, a leak in the cabin roof during the winter rains, but they weathered each challenge together. By the following spring, Lillian had news that would change their lives forever. She waited until Ethan returned from a 3-day stint at the ranch, greeting him with a special supper and a nervous smile. "Is everything all right?" Ethan asked, noticing her unusual demeanor. "You're practically glowing." Lillian took a deep breath. "I saw Dr. Miller in town yesterday. I've been feeling unwell in the mornings and I wanted to be sure before I told you." Ethan set down his fork, his eyes widening as understanding dawned. "Lil, are you saying?" She nodded, her eyes filling with happy tears. "We're going to have a baby, Ethan, sometime in November, Dr. Miller thinks." Ethan was around the table in an instant, gathering Lillian into his arms and lifting her off her feet in his excitement. "A baby! Our baby!" His unbridled joy erased any concerns Lillian might have had about adding another responsibility to their already challenging life. That night, as they lay together in their narrow bed, Ethan placed a protective hand over Lillian's still flat stomach. "We'll need to speed up plans for the house," he said. "This little one will need a proper room." Lillian covered his hand with her own. "We have time yet. And we'll manage, whatever comes." The news of Lillian's pregnancy accelerated their timeline for building the larger house. Ethan negotiated with Mr. Walsh for a temporary reduction in his work at the ranch, allowing him more time to focus on construction. In exchange, he agreed to break and train a string of difficult horses when the house was complete dangerous work that paid well, but that he had avoided since marrying Lillian. Henry Davis came to stay with them for several weeks, lending his carpentry skills to the project. Together, he and Ethan raised the frame for a modest but solid 2-bedroom home on a slight rise overlooking the creek, positioned to catch the morning sun and sheltered from the worst of the winter winds. By late summer, the house was habitable, though not fully finished. They moved in just as Lillian entered her 7th month, her belly now prominently rounded with new life. The timing was fortunate, as autumn brought unusually heavy rains that year, which would have made their cabin uncomfortably damp. Lillian took great pride in arranging their new home, setting up the 2nd bedroom as a nursery with a cradle Ethan had crafted from pine, and a rocking chair that had been a gift from Martha and her husband. She sewed tiny garments in the evenings, her heart full of anticipation for the child that would soon join their family. November arrived with mild weather, a blessing given Lillian's condition. She was uncomfortable now, finding it difficult to sleep and tiring easily with even minor exertion. Ethan took on more of the household duties, proving himself as capable in the kitchen as he was with livestock. On a clear morning in the middle of the month, Lillian awoke to the unmistakable sensation of her waters breaking. "Ethan," she said, shaking his shoulder, "it's time." Ethan was instantly alert, his face a mixture of excitement and panic. They had arranged for Martha to attend the birth, as she had experience assisting Dr. Miller. "I'll go for Martha right away," he said, pulling on his clothes with fumbling hands. "Hurry," Lillian urged, already feeling the first twinges of what would become increasingly powerful contractions. The ride to town and back with Martha seemed endless to Ethan. By the time they returned, Lillian was well into labor, pacing the bedroom with one hand supporting her back. Martha took charge immediately, sending Ethan to boil water and prepare clean linens. The labor lasted through the day and into the night, Lillian's strength and determination impressing both Martha and Ethan. Finally, as dawn approached, their son entered the world with a robust cry that filled the small house. "A boy," Martha announced, quickly cleaning and wrapping the infant. "A fine, healthy boy." Ethan, who had remained by Lillian's side throughout the ordeal, looked upon his son's face for the first time with wonder. The tiny being had his dark hair but Lillian's delicate features. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. They named him Henry Ethan Calloway Henry after Lillian's father, who arrived a week later to meet his namesake, his weathered face softening at the sight of his first grandchild. "You've done well," Henry told them both, cradling the infant with surprising gentleness. "Built a good life here." The first months with baby Henry were a whirlwind of adjustment for Ethan and Lillian. The infant had a healthy appetite and a strong set of lungs, making his needs known clearly and frequently. Nights were often broken into short segments of sleep between feedings, and days were a continuous cycle of caring for the baby while still maintaining their home and land. Despite the challenges, neither Ethan nor Lillian would have changed a thing. Watching their son grow his first smile, the way his tiny fingers would wrap around one of Ethan's, the contented sounds he made while nursing at Lillian's breast brought them joy beyond measure. Spring arrived, bringing new growth to their land and new milestones for little Henry, who was now holding his head up and attempting to roll over. Ethan's small herd had weathered the winter well, with several new calves adding to their numbers. The vegetable garden was expanded, and Lillian added a section for herbs and flowers. It was during this time that unexpected visitors arrived at the Calloway property. Ethan was mending a fence when he spotted two riders approaching from the direction of town. As they drew nearer, he recognized Mr. Walsh and another man he didn't know, well-dressed and city-like in appearance. "Calloway," Mr. Walsh called in greeting as they reined in their horses. "Hope we're not interrupting your work." "Not at all," Ethan replied, setting down his tools. "What brings you out this way?" Mr. Walsh gestured to his companion. "This is Mr. Harrington from Sacramento. He's looking to buy cattle for his company, good breeding stock at fair prices. I told him you have some of the finest young heifers in the county." Ethan tried to hide his surprise. His small herd was healthy, to be sure, but hardly noteworthy yet. Still, he wasn't about to turn down a potential buyer. "I'd be happy to show you what I have, Mr. Harrington." As they walked the property, inspecting the cattle, Mr. Harrington asked informed questions that revealed his knowledge of the business. He seemed particularly impressed by the care Ethan had taken in selecting his breeding bull. "Most small operations overlook the importance of good bloodlines," Harrington commented. "You clearly haven't made that mistake." By the end of the tour, Harrington had made an offer for 5 of Ethan's heifers and, somewhat unexpectedly, expressed interest in establishing an ongoing relationship. "My company supplies beef to Sacramento and San Francisco," he explained. "We're always looking for reliable sources. If your cattle maintain this quality, I'd be interested in regular purchases." After the men departed, Ethan hurried to the house, eager to share the news with Lillian. He found her in the garden, Henry sleeping peacefully in a basket under the shade of a nearby tree. "Lil, you won't believe what just happened," Ethan said, scooping her into an embrace that lifted her feet off the ground. He explained about Harrington's visit and the potential it represented. "This could be the beginning of everything we've worked for," he concluded. A steady buyer means steady income, enough to expand the herd more quickly and maybe add to our land eventually. Lillian's eyes shone with pride. I always knew you would succeed, Ethan. You've worked so hard for this. That night, after Henry was asleep in his cradle, they sat on the porch of their home, Ethan's arm around Lillian's shoulders as they gazed at the stars scattered across the clear night sky. "You ever think about that day we met?" Lillian asked softly. "During the blizzard." Ethan smiled, drawing her closer. "Often, if not for that storm, we might never have crossed paths." "My hands were so cold," Lillian remembered. "I could barely feel them. And I wrapped them in mine," Ethan finished. "Best decision I ever made." Lillian rested her head against his shoulder, content in the knowledge that from that simple act of kindness had grown a love that would last a lifetime. "I think we were destined to find each other, storm or no storm." "Maybe so," Ethan agreed, "but I'm grateful for that blizzard all the same." As the years passed, the Calloway family prospered. Ethan's partnership with Harrington's company proved fruitful, allowing them to expand their operation steadily. The small herd grew, additional acreage was acquired when neighboring land became available, and their modest house was enlarged to accommodate their growing family. Henry was joined by a sister, Elizabeth, 2 years after his birth, and then by another brother, James, 3 years later. Each child brought new joy and challenges to their lives, but Ethan and Lillian faced them together, their partnership strengthening with each passing season. By the time Henry was 8, the Calloway Ranch had become one of the most respected in the county. Ethan's reputation for fair dealing and quality livestock spread throughout Northern California, bringing new opportunities and connections. Lillian, while primarily focused on their home and children, had developed a small side business selling her herbal preparations and home remedies in Red Bluff, which had grown into a bustling town. Life wasn't without its hardships. A particularly severe drought tested their resources one summer, forcing them to drive their cattle to distant pastures. Illness swept through the family one winter, leaving Lillian to care for 3 sick children and Ethan simultaneously. Elizabeth's difficult birth had been frightening, with Dr. Miller arriving barely in time to help with complications. But through each challenge, the foundation of love and trust that had begun on that snowy day in Red Bluff sustained them. They worked side by side, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other's weaknesses. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Lillian with a special gift, a new locket to replace the one he had given her on their wedding day, which had worn thin from constant wear. The new one was gold rather than silver, with their initials and wedding date engraved on the back. "Open it," Ethan instructed, just as he had a decade earlier. Inside were tiny photographs, one of Ethan and one showing all 3 children together, their faces serious in the formal pose required by the photographer's long exposure time. "It's beautiful," Lillian said, tears welling in her eyes. "Perfect." That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat together on their porch as they often did, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Ethan held Lillian's hand, his thumb absently tracing the calluses that years of work had left there. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Marrying a cowboy with nothing but dreams to his name?" Lillian turned to him, surprised by the question. "Not for a single moment," she replied without hesitation. "Those dreams became our reality, Ethan. Look at what we've built together." She gestured toward their home, the well-tended fields beyond, the distant figures of their cattle grazing peacefully on the hillside. "This is everything I ever wanted, and more than I ever imagined possible." Ethan's expression softened. "You know, I think I loved you from the moment I saw you struggling through that blizzard. There was such determination in you, such strength. I knew then that you were someone extraordinary. And I fell in love with your hands, Lillian confessed with a smile. My hands. Ethan looked confused. The way you held mine that day when they were shaking from the cold. You were so gentle, yet so strong. She brought his hand to her lips, pressing a kiss to the weathered skin. These hands have built our home, protected our family, and held me through every joy and sorrow. How could I not love them and the man they belonged to? As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the porch, reminiscing about the past decade and planning for the future. There was talk of sending Henry to school in Sacramento when he was older, of adding a proper orchard to their property, of hosting the county harvest festival the following autumn. Later that night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Ethan pulled Lillian close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. 10 years ago, I promised to love and cherish you for all my days, he whispered. That promise is as true now as it was then. And I promise to stand by your side through whatever life might bring, Lillian replied. I've never regretted that vow, not once. Ethan's fingers found hers beneath the covers, intertwining in a gesture that had become second nature over the years. Here's to the next 10 years, he said, and the 10 after that, and however many more we're blessed with. And beyond, Lillian added softly, for I believe that what we've found together is rare and precious enough to transcend even time itself. As they drifted toward sleep, Lillian thought once more of that winter day in Red Bluff when fate had brought them together. How strange and wonderful that the simple act of a cowboy warming a young woman's cold hands could lead to such a rich and beautiful life. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, pattering against the roof of the home they had built together. Within its walls, 3 children slumbered peacefully, secure in the knowledge of their parents' love. And in the master bedroom, Ethan and Lillian Calloway held each other close, their hearts beating in tandem as they had for a decade, and would for decades more to come. The years continued to unfold for the Calloway family, each season bringing its own joys and challenges. Henry grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's work ethic and his mother's compassion. Elizabeth inherited Lillian's artistic talent, creating beautiful sketches of the ranch and its surroundings. James, the youngest, showed a natural affinity for horses that even Ethan found remarkable. As Red Bluff and the surrounding areas developed, so did opportunities for the Calloway Ranch. The arrival of the railroad made shipping cattle to distant markets more efficient, and Ethan's reputation for quality stock spread even further. By the time they celebrated their 15th anniversary, the modest 40 acres they had started with had grown to over 300, with a herd of nearly 200 head of cattle. Their home, once a simple 2-bedroom structure, had been expanded several times to accommodate their growing family and increasing prosperity. A proper parlor had been added, along with a study for Ethan and a sewing room for Lillian. The kitchen, always the heart of their home, had been enlarged and equipped with modern conveniences that Lillian sometimes still marveled at. Life moved forward, bringing inevitable changes. Henry, at 18, departed for college in San Francisco, the first Calloway to pursue higher education. His absence left a noticeable void in their daily lives, but his letters home, filled with excitement about his studies and new experiences, brought them joy. Elizabeth, now 16, was blossoming into a beautiful young woman whose artistic talents had caught the attention of a traveling art teacher who visited Red Bluff periodically. With Ethan and Lillian's blessing, she began taking formal lessons, her skills developing rapidly under proper instruction. James, at 13, was his father's shadow, absorbing everything he could about ranching and already showing a knack for business that suggested he might someday take over the family operation. Through it all, Ethan and Lillian's partnership remained the foundation that supported everything else. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative droughts that threatened their livelihood, illnesses that frightened them with their intensity, disagreements that tested their patience with each other. But the bond that had begun with a simple act of kindness during a blizzard had only strengthened with time. On a crisp autumn day in 1893, 15 years after they had met, Ethan and Lillian rode out together to the highest point on their property, a gentle hill that offered a panoramic view of everything they had built. The trees were ablaze with color, the cattle dotted the distant pastures like scattered chess pieces, and their home stood solid and welcoming in the valley below. "You remember what this looked like when I first brought you here?" Ethan asked, dismounting and helping Lillian down from her horse. "Empty," Lillian recalled, accepting his hand. "Beautiful but untamed, just waiting for someone to love it." Ethan spread a blanket on the ground and they sat together, sharing the simple lunch Lillian had packed: bread, cheese, apples from their orchard, and a small flask of wine for the occasion. "I was so nervous that day," Ethan confessed, stretching out beside her. "Afraid you'd think the land wasn't good enough, or that my dreams were too ambitious." Lillian smiled, remembering his earnest descriptions of everything he hoped to build. "I never doubted you would make those dreams reality. You've always had a way of achieving what you set your mind to." "We achieved it," Ethan corrected gently. "Everything here we built together." They ate in companionable silence for a while, watching an eagle soar above the distant mountains. Despite the years that had passed, Ethan still found himself captivated by his wife's profile, the gentle curve of her cheek, the way the sunlight caught the auburn highlights in her chestnut hair, now threaded with occasional strands of silver. "What are you staring at?" Lillian asked, catching his gaze. "The most beautiful woman I've ever known," Ethan replied simply. "Inside and out." Lillian blushed, a charming reaction that hadn't faded with familiarity. "You're still quite the charmer, Mr. Calloway." "Only stating facts, Mrs. Calloway." After they had eaten, Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "I have something for you." Lillian accepted it with a questioning look. "It's not our anniversary for another week. Consider it an early gift." Ethan watched as she unwrapped the package, revealing a delicate silver bracelet with 3 small charms: a book, a house, and a heart. "The book is for your love of stories," Ethan explained as he fastened it around her wrist. "The house is for the home we've built together. And the heart, well, that one's obvious." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes as she examined the thoughtful gift. "It's beautiful, Ethan. Thank you." They remained on the hillside until the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, talking about their children, their plans for the ranch, and memories of the years they had shared. As the air grew cooler, Ethan wrapped his arm around Lillian's shoulders, just as he had countless times before. "Cold?" he asked, feeling her slight shiver. Lillian shook her head. "Not with you here." The simple statement took Ethan back to their first meeting, her hands shaking from the cold, his instinctive gesture to warm them between his own. How many times since then had they shared warmth, both physical and emotional? How many storms had they weathered together, finding shelter in each other's embrace? "I never imagined life could be this full," Ethan said quietly. "When I came to Red Bluff, I was just looking for work, a place to belong. I found so much more." Lillian leaned into him, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder. "We found each other," she said. "Everything else grew from that." As they packed up their picnic and prepared to ride back to the house, Ethan took Lillian's hands in a gesture that had become a symbol of their connection over the years. Her fingers were no longer the delicate, unblemished ones of the young woman he had met during the blizzard. Now they bore the marks of years of work, of creating a home, of raising children, of building a life. "I love you, Lil," he said, the simple words carrying the weight of their shared history. "More today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." Lillian's smile, warm and genuine, was the same one that had captured his heart 15 years ago. "And I love you, Ethan Calloway. Always have, always will." As they rode home together, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From a chance meeting during the worst blizzard in Red Bluff's history, to a life richer and more fulfilling than he had ever dared to dream, all because he had reached out to warm the hands of a brave young woman shaking from the cold. The future stretched before them, filled with possibilities yet to be explored. Their children would grow, perhaps marry and have children of their own. The ranch would continue to evolve and expand. There would be more challenges to face, more joys to celebrate, more moments to treasure. But whatever came, Ethan knew with certainty that they would face it as they had faced everything else together, hand in hand, their love a constant in an ever-changing world. And in the deepest winter nights, when the wind howled outside their window, he would still reach for her hands, warming them between his own, a reminder of where their story had begun and the endless chapters yet to be written.